Before we get started, though, I want to make it very clear I am not a medical professional, okay? I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse. I'm a social worker slash therapist. So all this information is not to diagnose or treat any disorder. It is simply for educational purposes only, okay? And if you do have questions, please feel free to add them into the chat. We'll have some time afterwards to have a conversation, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Why does brain health matter? Okay, I think it can be fairly obvious, but the brain isn't really just about our memory, right? This is how we govern, it governs how we move, how we feel, how we connect, right? And so it's important that regardless of our age, that we are mindful of how we care for our brains because our brains are responsible for everything, right? It's what makes sure our heart is beating. It's what makes sure our lungs are functioning. It's what makes sure that we metabolize our food, right? So brain health is of utmost importance. Um, and so mental slowing is a part of aging, right? But serious decline is not inevitable. Okay. A lot of times, especially for those of you caring for people who have a dementia diagnosis, it seems like every little mental glitch you experience, you can be like, oh, is that dementia? Oh, is that dementia? Oh, is that dementia? Right. And that makes sense, right? Because you're entrenched in it for so long. It's kind of like, hey, maybe this is, where I'm heading as well. Okay. But we all have some slowing down of the brain, some, decline, I guess, in some capacity. But that doesn't mean that we are experiencing Alzheimer's or dementia, okay? Um, we have more influence than what we think over our brain health. And I don't want to scare anybody with this presentation at all. I want to empower you, okay? So what you do today can shape how you age tomorrow, right? And even if you're caring for somebody who is aging or maybe even has a dementia diagnosis, these tips can still be very useful in how you care for them, okay? So what is brain health? So brain health means your brain is functioning at its best. Okay, so you're thinking clearly, you're regulating your mood, you're responding to the world around you. And this does change over time, but that's okay, right? So we've got 5 dimensions of brain functioning, and I'm going to go through them briefly. Because a lot of times when we think about brain functioning, we often focus a lot on our capacity to maintain memory, right? To recall information. And there is obviously a component to that, but there's more to it. Okay. So first we have cognitive. So this again is thinking clearly, remembering, learning. This is kind of what we think about when we think about, poor brain health, right? But then it's also motor, right? So our coordination, our balance, walking, right? Some of you may be caring for loved ones who, when they went for their evaluation, for their loved one who has maybe some decline and you're trying to see where they are, maybe the doctor had them walk, right? And they're checking their gait, they're checking their pacing, because that's part of brain health. Sensory, so that's our senses like sight, hearing, smelling, okay? Diminished senses can affect the brain input, right? Because you're not getting as much information because you can't see as well, you can't hear as well, right? The next area is tactile. So that's touch, temperature, pain awareness. So that's really important for safety, right? If you don't know something hurts, then you don't know to take your hand off the stove or what have you, right? And then also emotional. That's also a dimension of brain health. Your mood, your patience, your ability for your capacity for emotional resilience, right? So if your loved one is struggling emotionally, remember that is not personal. It can be neurological and a lot of times, right? Now, of course, some of you may be caring for parents or loved ones who maybe have always had some level of emotional instability, and that's normal for them. But some of you notice big shifts with your loved one that is not normal from what their normal is, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. So normal brain aging, okay? So one of the common questions I hear from caregivers is how do we know what's normal and how do we know what isn't, right? What's normal aging versus what could possibly be a dementia diagnosis? So it's an important question because not every memory lapse is dementia. As we age, our brains are naturally going to become a little bit slower. Kind of thinking about it on like an older computer, right? The processor still works, it just takes a little bit longer to load, but that doesn't mean the computer's broken, right? It just means that it's been loved well. And so the same is kind of true for our brains, right? We may take a little bit longer to find a word, or we might need a little bit more time to switch between tasks. Or occasionally we walk into a room and forget why we're even there in the first place. I'm guilty of that. But these are typically fairly normal, okay? Um, Research will suggest that while processing speeds slow somewhat with age, many older adults actually make better decisions because they have decades of experience to draw from, right? So slower thinking doesn't mean lower intelligence. It just kind of means that under the surface, the brain's been changing throughout your whole life, right? Um, there are some areas, particularly those involved in memory and attention, that gradually become smaller with age, right? In the brain that physically actually becomes smaller. And there are some brain chemicals that become a little less abundant, right? So think about like dopamine, oxytocin, things like that. And these structural changes can contribute to those small cognitive changes we expect to see during normal aging, okay? But the encouraging news is that not everything declines, right? Often our vocabulary stays at the same or can even improve as we age. Reading comprehension stays strong. Reasoning, built from life experience, often becomes one of our greatest strengths. So today, as we talk about dementia, I want us to begin with a really important foundation, okay? Aging and dementia are not the same thing. Okay, sometimes people get that confused, right? Well, you're going to get older, you're going to get dementia. That's just what happens. Okay, that's not the case. Okay, it's never too early and it's never too late to support brain health. Okay, so we can still, there's no, of course, magic bullet or, 5 steps to not ever get dementia, but we can definitely support brain health no matter how old or how young we are. It's never too early, never too late, okay? We don't have to experience dementia just because we're getting older, okay? So what's not normal, okay? Signs of dementia. So chronic stress, sleep deprivation, anxiety, grief, caregiver burnout, all of this can affect our concentration and our attention and our memory, okay? So caregiving itself can make your brain feel less reliable, okay? And if you're caring for someone with dementia and you're experiencing burnout and you're experiencing some, maybe cognitive shifts that you hadn't noticed before, I'm sure the pattern making part of your brain may be telling you things that aren't necessarily true. So I hope that this will kind of help you get your footing a little bit more, okay? So one of the reasons it's important to understand what we would expect from normal aging versus changes in like dementia or things that maybe deserve a closer look is so that we can kind of not let our mind spiral into that panic space, right? Like, oh, I'm 45 and I have dementia symptoms, right? You might, but it could just be you're tired, okay? So if you notice changes in yourself, you just need to ask, hey, is this becoming a pattern or is this just like an isolated event, right? Has it been 3 days where I've had 4 hours of sleep every night, right? Or is this something I've noticed over an extended period of time, okay? Most of us will occasionally forget names or misplace our keys and things like that. That happens. But what deserves more attention is that noticeable change from our own normal that continues over time, or if it begins interfering with your daily life, right? So some signs that are worth discussing with your healthcare provider could be getting lost in places that you know well, right? I've been going to the same restaurant for 15 years and yet I can't find the bathrooms all of a sudden, right? Repeatedly asking the same questions without remembering the answers, okay? Some of you caring for loved ones who have the dementia diagnosis, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe you're having a harder time planning or solving familiar problems, right? You're maybe experiencing significant changes in your personality, right? And I'm not talking about that shift where you're maybe more irritable because you haven't had a day off in 5 years, okay? I'm talking about like, hey, you are almost like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde scenario happening, right? Increased problems finding words or understanding a conversation. Of course, I can feel like this because I have a house full of preteens and teens, and I swear they speak a totally different language than I do. That's not what I'm talking about. Okay. Changes in your balance, right? Maybe you're having more frequent falls that are unexplained, right? I'm just walking normally, nothing's in my way, and just boom, I stumble, right? And then difficulty managing everyday tasks that were once routine, right? I've made this lasagna dish, a million times in my life, and now I can't remember the steps. Okay. So there are some medical conditions, medications, depression, vitamin deficiencies, poor sleep, chronic stress, all that stuff can affect your thinking, right? So we don't want to jump to conclusions, okay? But we also don't want to ignore persistent changes. We want to get curious, okay? And one of the greatest challenges is that our brains compensate pretty well, right? So sometimes changes develop gradually, so much so that we don't even notice, right? But somebody else externally might be like, hey, you okay? What's going on, right? And so that's why going to the doctor regularly and getting these checkups can be incredibly valuable for your peace of mind because they can help establish that baseline, right? What's normal for you? And it'll help your healthcare provider notice changes that maybe you don't, right? Because they're not in your body every day, all day. You are. And so if you go and get those regular checkups, your doctor's going to notice those shifts maybe before you do. Okay. Not always, but maybe. So we know that being a caregiver can make your brain feel overwhelmed, but that is very different from having a neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's or other dementias. Okay. So before we get any further, I want to clear up a common point of confusion, okay? We will often hear terms like mild cognitive impairment, dementia, and Alzheimer's used as though they mean the same thing, but they don't, okay? So dementia is an umbrella term. So there's dementia up here and then a bunch of other things that fall underneath it, okay? So it describes what's happening, not necessarily why it's happening. So under that umbrella are several different diseases, including Alzheimer's disease. Okay, so not everyone with dementia has Alzheimer's, but everyone with Alzheimer's has dementia. Okay, but you can also have vascular dementia. This is usually happens after somebody has like a stroke, right? Or are stroke prone because the blood vessels in the brain shrink or burst and it prevents proper blood flow into the brain. And so parts of the brain start to die off, and that's what causes the dementia. Lewy body dementia. This is also in the Parkinson's family. So you might have Parkinson's dementia, Parkinson's related dementia. That's also Lewy bodies. That's all kind of the same thing. And then there's frontotemporal dementia. So that means it affects the frontotemporal lobe of the brain. And the expressions of those will be much different. Okay. Each has its own pattern, but they all affect the thinking and daily functioning of the individual. So mild cognitive impairment, or MCI for short, means that someone's thinking has changed more than we would expect with normal aging, okay? But they're still able to live fairly independently. So they can usually manage cooking, shopping, paying bills, driving, right? Even if those tasks require a little bit more effort, they're still pretty safe to say they can do those on their own, okay? So with dementia, those cognitive changes start to interfere with your everyday life. So it's not about remembering, it's about function, okay? So one thing I really want to emphasize is that MCI is not a diagnosis of dementia, okay? You can have mild cognitive impairment and not have dementia. Some people with mild cognitive impairment can be stable for years. They don't need any of the extra care that those who have dementia would. Some even improve if the underlying cause is something treatable like poor sleep or depression or a medication side effect, or even a vitamin deficiency, right? They just need a shot of B12 or something and they might be on their way, right? But others may go on to develop dementia. Okay, so sometimes your doctor will diagnose mild cognitive impairment and not dementia, but then 5 years down the road, it develops into dementia or what have you, right? So we kind of want to think of MCI as like a warning light, okay? Not a prediction, right? But hey, pay attention, right? There could be some shifts that can take place, okay? So early signs of dementia can be very subtle and they're easy to explain away as stress, aging, or being distracted. And so that's why it's important for people to pay attention to their patterns rather than isolated moments, right? We all have brain farts. But if your brain is farting every day, all day, hey, maybe go talk with your doctor about it, right? So bring it up to your doctor. We don't want to panic. We just want to understand what's happening as early as possible, okay? So top 10 signs of dementia. Okay, so we've talked about normal aging, we've talked about mild cognitive impairment and dementia. So let's look at some of the common warning signs, okay? So as I go through these, I want you to kind of notice it's not one symptom that causes concern for us. It's a pattern of change that start affecting your everyday life, all right? So the first sign, obviously, memory changes that interfere with daily living. Okay, we're all going to experience memory changes as we age, but not every memory change is going to affect our daily living. Okay, so we don't want to ask, did they forget? The question is, can I recover the information? Okay, so someone experiencing normal aging may eventually remember the appointment or the name, right? It just takes them a little longer to get there. But a person living with dementia may not remember the event even happened at all, right? Well, I didn't go there. I don't know who you're talking about. Who are you even, right? Another common sign is difficulty with the tasks that are pretty familiar to us, right? So maybe someone who's cooked every Thanksgiving dinner for 40 years suddenly cannot remember the sequence necessary to prepare a simple meal, right? They've been able to make feasts for, dozens of people, but they can't even make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? It's not because they haven't done these things before. It's because the brain can no longer organize the steps the way that it used to. Okay, that's like executive dysfunction, right? We don't know how to get from A to B. We don't understand the steps between. Changes in language are also very common. Sometimes it's difficulty finding the right words. Sometimes it's substituting unusual words. And sometimes it's following a conversation, right? So again, we're looking for something, a change in that person's usual communication, okay? If they've always kind of fumbled with words, or if you've always had a hard time finding words, that's just how you are, right? But if it's a shift from what's normal to you, that's when it's time to get curious, okay? Disorientation, that's another sign. So we've all forgotten, what day of the week it is, right? Time means nothing sometimes, especially if we're very busy. But dementia is a little different. It's becoming lost somewhere familiar or not understanding how you got there, okay? You could also notice changes in judgment. So for example, wearing winter clothes in 105-degree heat, right? Or not recognizing when a situation is dangerous, right? They forget to look both ways before they cross the street. Running with knives, I don't know who's doing that, but that's the excuse that came to my brain. And maybe they're making, or maybe you're making financial decisions that are very unlike the person you've always been, right? Some people begin having difficulty with numbers, finances, or other forms of abstract thinking. And others begin putting objects in unusual places, like you put your keys in the freezer or the remote control in the bathroom. So those examples often make people smile, but they illustrate something very important. The issue isn't just that they're being absent-minded, okay, that happens to all of us. It's that the brain is losing its ability to organize the information, okay? Because if you think about it, if the organ is withering, then its functioning is going to decrease. And that's what we're looking at. It's not just, having a bad day or being maybe a little flighty in the brain or absent-minded or, I just need a cup of coffee, I'll be okay. It's a consistent pattern of decreased capacity in being able to work out the steps of daily life, okay? Let's see. Families also frequently notice changes in mood, personality, or behavior. And someone who's always been calm, maybe now all of a sudden they're kind of suspicious or paranoid about people. Someone outgoing may start to be a little bit more withdrawn, and someone patient may become incredibly irritable. Okay. Now, of course, I don't know about y'all, but ever since I hit 40, I'm a lot more irritable than I think I've ever been in my life. But I don't think I have dementia. I think that's just, part of the sequence of being a woman in her 40s. But these changes can be pretty difficult for families, right? Because they can often feel like they're losing pieces of the person that they knew. Um, and loss of initiative is also another common change. Okay, so maybe they stop participating in hobbies or social events. Um, Even things that they enjoy doing, right? Or if you're thinking about yourself, right? Maybe there's just things that you're just not going to participate anymore unless somebody encourages you to do it. Now, again, this could just be changes of life that are normal, but we're looking at a different, like a shift in personality a little bit, okay? And finally, some forms of dementia affect how the brain processes visual and spatial information. So that's depth perception, right? Judging the distance or navigating an environment can become much more difficult, right? Kind of like if you go to put a glass on the table and you've had that coffee table in that same spot in your house for the last 10 years. And then all of a sudden, in your mind, you're putting it on the table, but it's an inch off and it drops on the floor, right? It's because that spatial capacity to understand that spatial distance or what have you can be hindered because of dementia. So dementia doesn't just affect memory. Obviously, we can see that now. It affects language, judgment, problem solving, personality, and how someone moves through the world. And so that's why we think of dementia as a disease that affects the whole person, not just the ability to remember. Okay. One sign might just be a bad day, right? Several signs, especially when they're new and they're becoming frequent, they tell us it's time to become curious. Okay. An early evaluation can give you more information, more opportunities for planning, and sometimes access to treatment and supports that can really make a difference. So, what can we control, right? Some forms of Alzheimer's, some forms of dementia, like Alzheimer's, can be hereditary, but not always. Okay. There's a lot of different kinds of dementia that can be minimized or mitigated, the threat of it, because of some factors, the risk factors that we can control. Okay. So we can't control every risk factor, obviously. We can't change how old we are. We can't change our genetics. But research suggests that there are many things that support brain health and also support heart health. So you might have heard the phrase, if it's good for your heart, it's good for your brain. Okay, that's very true because a lot of it has to do with blood flow from the heart to the brain. Okay, the brain needs blood to stay healthy. It needs oxygen to stay healthy. Okay, so I like to think about the risk factors in three categories. Okay, so first it's our medical health, right? Things like high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, these all affect the health of the blood vessels. Okay. And of course, some of that stuff is hereditary, right? Some of it is genetic, but a lot of it is about lifestyle choices, right? If you have high blood pressure and you're on medication for it and it's recommended that you take it, I would highly recommend you follow your doctor's orders, not just for your heart alone, but also for your brain. Okay. Our brains rely on healthy blood flow every single day. The second category is lifestyle. Okay. Regular movement. How nutrient rich is the food you're consuming? Are you consuming tobacco products? So we can keep our brain engaged by learning new things or staying mentally active as a protective factor. Okay. So none of these are going to guarantee that you won't develop dementia, of course, but together they can help build what we call brain resilience. And the third category is social and emotional health. And I think this is one that, especially if you're a full-time caregiver, might be the most difficult for you to achieve. especially if you're just tired, right? I don't know about you all, but if I spend too much time around people, I get kind of depleted after that. I'm kind of tired. Not that I didn't enjoy the company, it's just it drains me a lot of times. And so I often have to force myself to be social because I know it's good for me, not because I actually have this, bleeding desire to be around people all the time. Um, so depression, chronic isolation, and loneliness don't just impact your mood, they impact the brain and its health. So human beings, of course, we're social creatures, and our brains are built for connection. Um, I don't want you to think, great, now I have 10 more things I should be doing, right? Most of you already have a lot on your plate. I just want you to maybe start asking, what is one small step I can take, right? What's one tiny commitment I can make to myself, right? So maybe it's just scheduling a medical appointment for yourself and not just your loved one. Get your blood work done, get your vitals checked, get all the basics squared away. Maybe it's calling a friend that you haven't spoken to in a while and have a nice conversation with them and catch up. We're just looking for small, consistent changes that matter, okay? You don't have to do everything. You just kind of have to begin somewhere, okay? Brain health isn't built by one perfect decision, okay? I wish it were. I wish you could just have one good conversation with a friend and not have to worry about it ever again, right? But it's built by thousands of ordinary choices, okay? Every healthy meal, every walk you take, every time you check your blood pressure, right? Every time you have a social interaction with your friends and family, those choices add up over time. And so none of us can eliminate our risk entirely, of course, but every step towards better health is one worth taking, okay? And as caregivers, you are probably incredibly skilled and very wonderful at helping someone else manage their medications and their blood pressure and get to their appointments and do all the things, right? So my encouragement today is just to remember that your brain also deserves that same level of care, okay? Especially because a lot of you are thinking for more than one person, right? So you definitely have to protect that health, right? You have to protect the functioning of your brain. How do we do that? 5 simple ways, okay? Um, every brain changes with age and mental function changes along with it. We know that. Mental decline is common and it's one of the more feared consequences of aging, but cognitive impairment is not inevitable, right? It doesn't have to be the story, okay? So here are 12 ways, well, 5 ways kind of, or 12 ways kind of squished into 5 categories, okay? Mental stimulation, okay? Learn, read, create, stay curious. Some of y'all love playing those little puzzle games. You like doing your Sudoku. You like reading nonfiction stories or even fiction stories. Painting, clay, any kind of art is going to be really, really good for the brain. Anything that challenges you, okay? Scientists have found that brainy activities stimulate new connections between the nerve cells and may help the brain generate new cells, evolving what we call or developing neurological plasticity. And it also builds up a functional reserve that provides a hedge against future loss. Okay. So mentally stimulating activities can help build up your brain. It's kind of like going to the gym and building up your glutes, right? These kind of activities strengthen your brain, okay? Getting physical exercise, right? Nutrition, making sure your blood pressure is where it needs to be, making sure your blood sugar is where it's supposed to be, making sure your cholesterol is where it should be. These are all really, really good for not only providing like a boost to your energy and your mood and things like that, but it keeps the brain working and functioning. It's like getting like that maintenance for your car, right? We want to make sure we take care of our bodies as best as we can. Next, sleep. Okay, this really is protective for our brains. And I know some of you are up and down all night, every night with your loved one, or you're ruminating and you have anxiety and you can't sleep. Okay, I understand all of that. But sleep hygiene can be a huge boon to our capacity to caregive and also protect the brain. Recently, researchers have seen that when we sleep, it's kind of like a cleanse, like it kind of filters a lot of the things out of our brain, like toxins and things like that. And so when you're not sleeping, it's kind of like that sludge accumulates and it's harder to get that more of that mental fog and things like that. Of course, avoiding tobacco, alcohol in moderation, and prevent head injury. Okay, a lot of times people don't think about that. You think, well, I'm not going to wear a helmet because I'm not a kid and I'm going to ride my bike without one. That's perfectly okay if that's what you want to do. However, you could fall off that bike or get hit by a car and hurt your brain pretty good, and that could become problematic for you. Um, Wearing seat belts, right? You can get into a fender bender and be okay, but sometimes it can shift you in a way that you have some repair you have to do after that because you weren't wearing your seatbelt. Staying connected, we talked about this already. Relationships and meaningful social engagement. And then partnering with your healthcare team. Some doctors might say, hey, take an aspirin, every day to help your heart health, and that's going to help your brain health. Of course, I'm not telling everyone to run out and start taking aspirin. I'm not a doctor, but if your doctor suggested that, they've probably done so for a reason. So just make sure you are working with your healthcare team so that you can maintain the best health for you, okay, with their expertise and supervision in mind. All right, so now we're going to talk about super agers, okay? Again, this idea that when you age, you're just waiting for the end, right? That your best years are behind you and, you just have to accept your fate. But that doesn't necessarily have to be 100% of the story, okay? A lot of people for a very long time assumed that growing older just automatically meant that you're going to lose your memory. But research is telling something very interesting, okay? There are people in their 80s and 90s and beyond whose memory performs as well as people decades younger, okay? So it's going against the grain of what we've always been told. Research calls these people cognitive superagers, okay? So that doesn't mean they're superhuman, okay? They're not a special breed of people. They still age, they still experience physical changes, but somehow their brains remain remarkably resilient. So naturally, people start asking, what are they doing, right? How is this different than what we've been seeing, right? So that's why researchers are now trying to understand what protects the brain, what helps it stay resilient, and what can we learn from these cognitive superagers, right? The encouraging news is that many of the things we've talked about today also show up in this research, right? Staying physically active, remaining socially connected, continuing to learn, managing any chronic health conditions that you may have, and also taking care of your emotional well-being, okay? None of these guarantee that we will become super agers, but they do remind us that our choices matter. Okay, we don't just have to accept the fact that as we age, our brain is going to decline. Okay. Our brains continue responding to how we live throughout our lives, and even a small change can make a meaningful difference over time. Okay. And one of the most exciting areas of research, at least in my opinion, over the last couple of years has been what we call the brain and body connection. Now, as a therapist and a social worker, I'm fully entrenched in this research, but it may be new to some of you. So I want to touch on it a little bit, okay? For a long time, we tended to kind of think of the brain as separate from the rest of the body, but we're learning that's just not how it works, okay? Our brain does not exist in isolation, okay? It is in constant conversation with the rest of our body, right? And if you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, duh, of course that's the way it is, right? But we just kind of think about it this way, okay? Your brain depends on healthy blood flow, quality sleep, movement, good nutrition, social connection. And so when we care for our bodies, we're also caring for our brains. And researchers have found that people who combine several healthy lifestyle habits have a significantly lower risk of developing Alzheimer's disease compared to people who follow very few of them, okay? So It's important to know that there is not one magic solution. It's recognizing that small, healthy choices work together, okay? Each one strengthens the whole system. Another fascinating finding of research is that physically active older adults tend to experience slower rates of cognitive decline than those who are active, okay? This isn't just about muscle strength, it's nourishing the brain. And we see the same relationship in heart health as well. So conditions like high blood pressure, diabetes, smoking, that all affects the blood vessels throughout the body, including the ones that supply the brain. And that's one of the reasons, again, why we say if it's good for your heart, it's good for your brain, okay? And then I'm going to talk a little bit more again about sleep, okay? We think of sleep a lot of times as just resting, but sleep is actually one of our brain's busiest times, okay? We're asleep, our brain is not, okay? This is when our memories are consolidated, okay? This is where our short-term memory becomes our long-term memory, okay? There's a lot of activity going on while we're sleeping. This is when the brain restores itself. This is when waste products are cleared away, like I mentioned before, okay? Sleep is essential brain maintenance. So when we forego sleep or when we feel guilty for taking a nap, keep this in your back pocket, okay? I'm allowed to rest. I need to rest. My brain needs this so that I can actively, cleanse it and filter through and all that stuff, right? It's not a guilty pleasure to sleep a full night, okay? It's maintenance, okay? Most of this research, though, does come from observational studies. That means that they were just, they had a group of people that they were steadily tracking over time and taking observational notes. So we can't say that these habits cause better brain health with absolute certainty, but the evidence consistently points in the same direction, okay? Healthy lifestyles appear to support healthier brains, okay? So we don't want to complicate it, okay? Just ask yourself, hey, did I move my body today? Right? Did I get up and do stretches, right? You don't have to get up and be a power lifter, right? But did I move my body today in a way that felt good? Did I drink enough water, right? Have I been outside if the weather's, tolerable? July in Alabama, maybe not. But, did you get some fresh air, right? Have I connected with another person? Have I cared for my emotional well-being, right? These are just ordinary habits that really, really matter a lot more than we realize sometimes. So we cannot separate the brain from the body, okay? They are constantly communicating. So when we care for one, we are caring for both. So here's some practical information about nutrition. Now, I know it can be really costly to eat healthy sometimes, right? Hamburger Helper is always going to be cheaper than a plank of salmon. Okay, I know that. I have 5 children. I understand groceries are insane. Okay. But we're not looking for perfection. Okay. We're looking towards a turning into the right direction. Okay. So there is something called the MIND diet and the DASH diet. Okay. So it's really just like the Mediterranean diet, a heart healthy diet. Okay. These are things that can really bring a lot of nutritional value into our systems. Okay. What does that look like? Leafy greens. Okay. The kales, the collards, all that. Okay. Berries, nuts, olive oil instead of butter. I know. Whole grains, fish. Okay. Not fried fish. Sorry. But just, grilled or baked fish. Okay. Minimize red meat consumption, minimize butter consumption, and if you can avoid processed foods, do so as is available to you, okay? Which is really difficult. Again, most of our foods are processed. Most of the affordable foods have less nutritional value, unfortunately. So again, I'm not condemning you if you are not in this space. I'm just inviting you to get curious about what you can achieve with the resources you have, okay? We're not trying to be perfect. We're trying to build better patterns, okay? Now, how do you support a loved one who is aging and helping them to age well? Okay. Encourage regular doctor visits. Okay. I know you can't force people to do things they don't want to do, unfortunately, but we can be encouraging, right? Watch for changes in mood or behavior. Again, consistently shifting, not just they had a bad day, right? Try to be as patient and compassionate as possible. I know for some of you that's easier said than done. And try to promote healthy habits. You could even just be the example, right? And engage in shared meaningful activities with their peers or family and friends, and know when to seek help, okay? When it comes to supporting a loved one, okay, we want to think compassion over correction, okay, and connection before control. Okay, so don't just barge into someone's life and start making demands on how they need to start living their life. You wouldn't want somebody doing that to you. At least I know I wouldn't. I'd be like, get out of here. Or like, why are you even in my space, right? So we want to make sure we're connecting before we try to control anything, okay? All right, last slide. We don't have to do everything, okay? But doing something, especially early, can change everything, right? Our brains are changing every day, but the beautiful news is it is still listening, right? Every walk you take, every conversation you have, every good night's sleep, every new thing that you learn, right? Every stitch of your crochet, right? Every act of caring for ourselves, the brain notices that. And so none of us, of course, can stop aging, but we can continue giving our brains reasons to grow, to adapt, and to stay connected throughout our lives. Okay. Here's a quote from Abraham Lincoln. Allegedly, I haven't talked to him personally. The best way to predict your future is to create it. Okay. It's never too early and it's never too late to invest in your brain health. Okay. Small changes can make a big difference. Here's my contact info. If you have any questions about this training or any future trainings, or if you need resources, or you want to reach out for our free therapy services that we provide to caregivers and care recipients, this is how you connect with me. You can email me, jstang@ucphuntsville.org, or you can call the office. I don't work Wednesdays, but if you call and leave a message, I'll get back to you when I can, okay? Also, if you want to participate in the post survey for the $50 education stipend, now is the time to put your email address in the chat so I can send it to you. If I don't have your email, I can't send you the survey. And if you can't complete the survey, you can't get the stipend, okay? Also, the stipend must be completed within 24 hours, okay? So that means by this time tomorrow, you have to have that completed. Otherwise, the stipend becomes ineligible, okay?